The walking pillbox, the Soviet monster that could have changed World War II. Picture this. It's 1942, and World War II is raging. The Soviet Union is locked in a brutal fight against Nazi Germany. Cities are burning, factories are running 24/7, and engineers are scrambling to come up with game-changing weapons. In the middle of this chaos, a bold idea emerges from a steel mill in the Ural Mountains, a walking pillbox, a hulking, armored beast that could move like a tank but hit like a fortress. This wasn't just another tank or artillery piece. It was a whole new kind of war machine, designed to be nearly invincible and change the way battles were fought. I stumbled across this story while digging through old archives, and let me tell you, it's a gem. It's not just about a quirky invention. It's about human grit, creativity under pressure, and the wild ideas that war brings out. In this deep dive, I'll walk you through the story of the walking pillbox, break down its nuts and bolts, share some thoughts on why it never made it to the battlefield, and throw in some economic and historical context to give you the full picture. Plus, I've scoured modern sources to see how this idea stacks up today. Ready to geek out? Let's do this. It's spring 1942, and the Soviet Union is on its knees. The Nazis are pushing deep into Soviet territory, and the Red Army is desperate for anything to turn the tide. In Magnitogorsk, a gritty industrial city in the Ural Mountains, a team of engineers led by Nikolai Alexenko comes up with a wild plan, a mobile fortress that can walk across the battlefield. They called it the Shigayishchi DOT, or walking pillbox, a heavily armored bunker that could move on mechanical legs, combining the firepower of a tank with the toughness of a concrete fortress. This wasn't some pie-in-the-sky dream. The team had serious backing. Ivan Tvozhin, the Soviet minister in charge of steel production, saw potential in the idea and promised to greenlight a prototype if the military gave it a thumbs up. They even brought in experts from Leningrad's tank school who'd been evacuated to Magnitogorsk to help flesh out the design. It looked like the walking pillbox might actually become a reality. But here's where things got tricky. In July 1942, the team sent their blueprints and calculations to the Red Army's main armored directorate, GAB-2. Problem was, GAB-2 was all about tanks, not mobile bunkers, which were technically under the engineering corps' turf. The military brass, including Lieutenant General Yakov Fedorenko, took a look but weren't sold. Despite a glowing recommendation from Major General Alexander Borzakov of the tank school, the experts at GAB-2 pointed out some major flaws, and the project got shelved. The blueprints were tossed into an archive, forgotten for decades. Why did this happen? Let's dig deeper. But first, let's take a quick trip back in time to see where the idea of mobile fortifications came from. The concept of a moving fortress wasn't born in 1942. Way back in the late 1800s, a German engineer named Schumann came up with a bronze carriage, a wheeled artillery platform with a 57mm gun. These could be hauled by horses or trains and set up in concrete emplacements, acting as mobile gun nests. Over 300 were built by 1890, and they saw action in World War I, holding their own against small arms and shrapnel. But as artillery got bigger and badder, these carriages became sitting ducks. Fast forward to the interwar years, and engineers worldwide were obsessed with beefy war machines. In the Soviet Union, German designer Eduard Grot pitched a 1,000-ton land battleship called the TG-5 in 1931, with 300mm armor and a ton of guns. It was too crazy to build, but the idea lingered. Grot later took a similar concept to Nazi Germany with the P.1000 Rad, another unbuilt monster. Meanwhile, the Germans did manage to produce the Maus, a 188-ton super heavy tank with 200mm armor, by 1944. In Britain, they slapped concrete bunkers on truck chassis to create Bison mobile pillboxes. The Soviets, too, were tinkering with heavy hitters like the multi-turreted T-35 tank and the Su-100Y, a beastly self-propelled gun with a 130mm naval cannon designed to smash Finnish bunkers. Alexenko's walking pillbox was the next step in this evolution, a bold attempt to create a fortress that could move on its own, even if it was at a snail's pace. Let's break down how this thing was supposed to work. Imagine a giant, egg-shaped armored pod, like the turret of a KV tank. But instead of tracks, it's got two mechanical legs that let it walk across the battlefield. The walking pillbox was a beast. Its welded armor was 200 millimeters thick in the front and rear, 120 millimeters on the sides, and 30 to 50 millimeters on the top and bottom. That's tougher than any tank the Soviets had in 1942 and on par with the concrete bunkers dotting the front lines. Even the fearsome German 88 millimeters gun, which could punch through most tanks, would have struggled to crack this thing from a typical combat range. Inside, there was room for a three-man crew, a commander, a driver mechanic, and a gunner. It was cramped, but the thick armor kept them safe. The main weapon was a 76 mm L-17 gun, mounted in the front with limited traverse, capable of blasting infantry, light fortifications, and enemy vehicles up to a mile away. It carried 100 shells, a solid stash for a defensive machine. For close-in defense, it had 3 DT, 29 machine guns, one paired with the main gun, 2 in ball mounts on the sides, with 5,000 rounds to keep enemy infantry at bay. The real magic was in the movement. 2 massive, hinged legs worked like eccentric cams. Each step lifted the 45-ton body and pulled it forward about 4 feet. Top speed, a leisurely 1.2 miles per hour, slower than a Sunday stroll, but that wasn't the point. When stationary, the pillbox lowered onto a heavy base plate, anchoring it to the ground for rock-solid stability during firing. The engine was a humble GZ 202, a 76-horsepower unit borrowed from the T-60 light tank, paired with a transmission from a YG-6 truck. It wasn't flashy, but it used off-the-shelf parts, which made production easier. The walking pillbox was designed to be a defensive powerhouse. Dug in, it was a near-invincible bunker, shrugging off artillery and anti-tank fire. Its ability to move, even slowly, gave it a huge edge over static fortifications. It could reposition to cover weak spots, fall back to a new line, or even creep forward in urban combat, shielding infantry like a rolling castle. Picture 3 of these bad boys advancing in a line, blasting away with their 76 mm guns and machine guns, creating a wall of fire that'd be tough to flank or overrun. But it wasn't perfect. At 1.2 miles per hour, it wasn't exactly sprinting to the front. The legs were complex and prone to breaking under the strain of a 45-ton load, especially on rough terrain littered with craters and debris. Reloading ammo in the heat of battle would have been a nightmare, requiring the pillbox to retreat or risk being caught with empty guns. And getting it to the front? That meant hauling a 45-ton beast by train or heavy truck. Tough in 1942, when the Soviets were short on heavy transport. To understand why the walking pillbox never made it off the drawing board, let's talk about the Soviet economy in 1942. The country was in survival mode. Factories had been relocated to the Urals, resources were scarce, and the focus was on pumping out proven weapons like the T-34 tank. According to historical data, the Soviets produced about 24,000 tanks in 1942, but every new design meant diverting steel, workers, and time from the assembly lines. The walking pillbox, as cool as it was, would have been a risky bet. Steel was a big bottleneck. Magnitogorsk, where the prototype was supposed to be built, was cranking out armor plate for tanks and guns. Diverting resources to an untested machine could have slowed production of critical weapons. Logistics were another headache. Soviet railways were stretched thin, and heavy trucks were in short supply. The U.S. was sending aid through Lend-Lease, but heavy transports were still trickling in. Building and deploying a fleet of walking pillboxes would have been a logistical nightmare. After reviewing the blueprints, Gabta gave the walking pillbox a hard pass. The legs were too fragile, the speed too slow, and the logistics too daunting. Plus, the military was focused on tanks and self-propelled guns, proven tech that could be mass-produced. An experimental walking fortress? Too weird, too risky. The blueprints were filed away, and the project faded into obscurity until historian Yuri Pashalok rediscovered them in the 2010s, proving it wasn't just a tall tale. The walking pillbox is more than a quirky footnote in history. It's a testament to human ingenuity in the face of desperation. Even if it never saw battle, it shows how war pushes people to think outside the box. Today, walking mechanisms are used in robotics and heavy machinery. Think of those giant excavators that inspired movies like War of the Worlds. Who knows? Maybe the walking pillbox was ahead of its time, and future tech will bring it back in a new form. That's the wild tale of the walking pillbox, folks. It's a story of big dreams, tough times, and the kind of crazy ideas that make history so fascinating. If you love this deep dive, hit that subscribe button, give us a like, and drop a comment. Tell me what you think. Would the walking pillbox have changed World War II? Got any wild ideas of your own? Let's talk about it. Stay tuned for more epic stories from the past.